Good afternoon. This is your second in the series of toxicology lectures, and my goal for you today is to recognize a hazmat scene. Now, we all know the ways that people are exposed to toxins. In your book, it talks about 4 ways. Toxins can be inhaled, toxins can be absorbed, ingested, and injected. In your book, it talks about how with ingestion, that's 80% of the poisonings that we see. But I'm going to talk today about an inhaled poison. So one of the most important things for you when you're recognizing a hazmat scene is your own safety. And this is why I bring up this situation. There's a common practice to, it started in Japan, to create within your car a sort of tomb. You put a bunch of chemicals in your car and it creates a gas that's very deadly. It's called hydrogen sulfide. It's a colorless, flammable gas and it smells like rotten eggs. It's a common gas that's found in sewers, it's found in lots of other places, and I have it in my notes here where it's found. Sewers, swamps, volcanoes, and in crude petroleum plants. So it's found in a lot of different places, but what we're finding that people will do is use a bunch of chemicals to create kind of like a tomb for themselves. So they'll commit suicide by putting all these chemicals in their car, keeping their car closed, and then what will happen is someone calls because they see a person in their car slumped over the steering wheel or whatever, and EMS arrives and they see the same thing. And one of the things that I want you to do in that moment, if you're called to a scene like that, is to remember, okay, I have to recognize if this is a hazmat scene or not. I need to take a step back and go, okay, my natural tendency is to run towards this scene and to help this patient. But I need to take a step back and say this could be a situation where, there's gas in the car, and if I open that door, I could be also affected by this gas. So you need to take a step back, call hazmat, call some backup, make sure that you and your partner are protected. And if you are not trained and don't have the proper PPE to approach that scene, then you need to wait. I know it's going to be really hard because you want to jump in and help somebody, but you could risk your own life, okay? So one of the things that is the most important in recognizing a hazmat scene is stopping, calling for the correct people to come in and take care of the issue before you start to treat your patient. With hydrogen sulfide exposure, the only thing that you're really going to be able to do is, once you get that patient out of the exposure to that gas, is treat the symptoms, right? So if the patient's not breathing, you're going to have to, give them rescue breathing. If there's any other things that you see that you can fix using your primary assessment, you need to do that, okay? But like I said, the most important thing is to recognize it's a hazmat scene first so that you don't also become a patient. So with hydrogen sulfide exposure, I told you that the only real solution is getting the patient out of the exposure to that gas. Now for you guys in a toxicology chapter, you'll see that there are several things used to treat exposures to poisons. I told you about the 4 types that were exposed to poisons, and even in my last lecture I talked about exposure to nerve agent poisoning, which we use, if you remember, the 2-PAM chloride for. But there are some other things that we use to treat poisonings aside from just removing the patient from the exposure. So you'll also hear of something called activated charcoal, and this is something that you will give for ingested poisons. All right, now as an EMR you can't actually give this medication, but I want you to be aware that it exists and that it is used in EMS, and that if you go on to EMT or paramedic, it's something that you could possibly use if a patient has ingested a poison. Now remember, 80% of the poisonings happen from ingestion, okay? The other thing that you're going to be using is what's called Narcan, and this is something you can give, okay? This is for injected poisons, for example, opioids and opiates. So that's something that you're going to be able to help bring the patient back from respiratory compromise, which is what an opioid will do when it's been overdosed by a patient. Another thing that I want you to remember is the most important thing that you're going to be able to do for your patient is to also call poison control. If you don't know what's going on, but you see a bunch of bottles, or you see some syringes, or you see, some certain things, maybe plants, right? Because there are plants that can poison a patient. Go ahead and call poison control. Tell them what you see, and they can give you a lot of answers and how to, resolve that issue as you're on your way to the hospital or as you're waiting for ALS to arrive, okay? Again, I already told you that we talked last week about 2-PAM chloride, so that's another one of the antidotes that you can give. Okay, so real quick, just to review, all right, I sort of created a little sandwich of a lecture for you. We talked about the ways that poisons are exposed to people, so inhaled, absorbed, ingested, and injected. The situation that I talked to you today was about an inhaled substance called hydrogen sulfide, and I'll write that up here. And it's one that I bring up only because, for example, if you have a patient that's injected a poison, right, or ingested a poison, right, that is harming your patient, and you're there to help them, okay? And that makes total sense. But if there is a gas that you're going to be exposed to by walking up to your patient, especially if they created that gas, your life is in danger. And you can't help anybody if you walk up to that scene because you didn't recognize it and you go down, okay? So the most important thing for you today to recognize from that one situation that I talked to you about is there's going to be a situation where you need to step back, look at what's going on and say, this is a hazmat scene, and to protect myself and my partner, we're going to wait, call for backup, okay? Along with that, I talked to you at the end about the solutions that we have in our toolbox to treat other kinds of poisonings, and those are going to be something that you read more on in your book, and then we talk a little bit more on in lab. So as an overall goal for recognizing a hazmat scene, just remember the whole goal of that is to protect yourself and recognize when that might be at risk.